Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode on Fit as a Fiddle. I am really excited to introduce our guest here today. Her name is Janel Martir. Janel is a New York-based birth worker, and she specializes in evidence-based birth education, lactation support, and holistic prenatal wellness. And Janel has a vast array of experience in the medical field and attending many births. And so Janel and I have worked closely, but not so closely in multiple capacities over the years. We've kind of just bumped and crossed paths in various capacities. But I'm really excited to sit here and really learn about your story, Janel, one-on-one. And so welcome to the podcast, and thank you for making time for us today.
Thanks, Neha. I'm so excited to be here. Yeah, I've been wanting to reach out and chat, so I'm happy we can do it in this way.
Yeah, the podcast is such a great excuse for me to just have a coffee and chill and talk to people that I admire and think are wonderful in the health field or the wellness space. So I'm really happy that we make this work. So Janel, for the audience, I'd love for you to just give a little bit of background on the, your background, your work, your medical experience, and everything that you're doing. I know you have yoga training and as a doula and lactation, you have lots of different hats that you wear in your professional work. So I'd love for you to just touch on all of that and what brought you to this space.
Yeah, so right now, currently, I'm a full-time birth worker, so a professional birth doula. I'm full-time. I have really interesting pathway to it. I always had a fascination with the female body, even since I was really little. And then when I was in grad school, that's where I kind of just developed it further. When I was in medical school, I specialized kind of in obstetrics and clinical education around obstetrics and how to train medical students in their obstetrics rotation, and that kind of just got me really interested in the field, but also specifically in education. When I was a fourth year medical student, I got this great opportunity to go to Uganda and work with the birth team at Mulago National Hospital, which is it's the main hospital in the country. And it was just a really amazing, eye-opening experience to see birth in a different setting than I was used to in New York and Vermont and Connecticut, Maine. It was just very different. I worked with the birth team and we delivered up to 70 births a day, which was really fascinating. And it's just it's a very different. And so when I came back from that experience, it was around 8 weeks. I just knew that I wanted to be in the birth space in some capacity. It wasn't until the end of my fourth year where I decided not to pursue obstetrics and do something totally different. And that decision was largely because I suffered a pregnancy loss, a late-term pregnancy loss, the end of fourth year. And then for almost a year, I could not even go near, pregnant people. But then slowly, it was actually through yoga that kind of helped me get more in touch with my body and kind of help deal with that trauma. And I was no, I really love the yoga. Let's teach yoga for a little bit. And then I taught yoga, and then I went to prenatal yoga. And then in that space, I had a lot of my students asking me oh, can you be my doula? And that's kind of how I started doing birth working specifically. But I've been in the birth space and working in obstetrics for a decade. And so I bring a lot of that experience and training and that clinical experience and that training into the birth work I do now. As a birth worker now, I'm not a clinician in that capacity, but I do offer all sorts of support. So wherever there are missing pieces to the care that they get, in terms of compassion, in terms of advocacy, birth justice, informational gaps, that's what I do. Yeah, and that's kind of how I ended up what I'm doing now, and I don't think it's going to change. I think this is going to be it for the future.
Yeah, I love that. I have so many things that I want to touch on based on what you just said right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess one of them is that it must be really awesome for your clients and the families that you work with to know that there's somebody who has medical training who's also their doula, because I've spoken with so many doulas in my career and interacted with so many people in the birth space. And often, it's not always the case, but it's just, there's this kind of narrative of the medical team is not listening to what I'm saying, or I'm not feeling comfortable and I need the doula to advocate for me, because I feel there's a disconnect, which is something that you just may have touched on a little bit in terms of birth justice and topics like that. But because you have seen the other side and you've done medical training. I think it's a really great combination of understanding both sides of the world for you. And maybe you can just touch on that and how that informs your practice even more.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really fascinating because I feel like I'm coming at it now in the birth space from the totally other different side. Like I didn't know what a doula was until third year medical school. Like I was like, what do you mean? Like, what do we need to do? Like I remember even like the first time finding out what a doula was, not understanding and feeling resistant to it. I remember that. And then now I'm like, what? Like it's just like, I just had no idea. I was also younger at the time, but I think in medicine, like, I mean, you've been trained also in medicine. It's like it's a very specific way of learning, and it's a culture you're kind of indoctrinated into. Like it is like it's a it's a professional society, so it's kind of like it's good. You're culturally like attuned, and you become like you imbibe whatever they tell you. And it's interesting in medicine because I feel like, especially in hospital births, sometimes there's like this weird like territorial thing that happens where it's like almost you have different people of the birth team trying to like claim the birth. They're trying to be like, well, this is my, like I make there's usually the OB or the provider make like, this I know I know the most. This is like, this is my domain, which is kind of true. Like the medical provider takes on most of the risk in the birth. So if anything goes wrong, like, it really kind of is on their shoulder. So I understand from that perspective the incentive to be very cautious and like be very low risk and risk averse. However, I have seen the other side of it where it's like if you're too risk averse, you kind of don't listen to the person who's actually giving birth. It's an interesting power dynamic where, like I mentioned, some people, like the people of the birth team, can look at the birth and try to claim it, but really, like the birth is happening in the birthing person's body. So really, the person who owns the birth is the person giving birth. Like, and sometimes we tend to forget that. And in situations that become tense, where that is the case, where it's like, I kind of feel sometimes there's like a vying for power. Like I always just bring it back to the birthing person, because in the end, like that's where the birth's happening, right? Like, yes, there's always risk everywhere and like complications, this and that can happen. But in the end, it's like, it comes down to choice. When I work with folks, like I do try to center their choices, like your medical team will tell you one opinion, and this is, their opinion. And if it's backed by maybe years or decades of experience and research and medical recommendations, that's very true. But also at the end of the day, it's like, this is your body, like, like, and you can decide, like only they can decide what they're comfortable with, how much risk they're willing to take and whatever decision they're going to make. But it has been interesting. So I do, I'm coming now from the other side where it's like, I'm really all about like, I just want my clients to like have the kind of birth they want. And for me, that means like, and not necessarily that it's going to go according to plan, because like sometimes it doesn't, but it's more about them feeling like heard and supported, because like we really can't control anything. Like, it's like, even if everything goes fine, but then 1 second later it's not, we can't control that. But at least like the people who are in labor can feel that they're listened to and heard, and like things that just don't happen to them, that they're like an active participant in their own healthcare. I found it interesting the last like 3 years, like I've had an increase of clients coming to me who are like from families of color, especially like immigrant families and Asian American families. Like, and I think that was spurred like around the pandemic, when there was kind of like a rise in like Asian American hate crimes. I thought that was really like obviously sad, but like that event kind of changed the conversations I was having with a lot of my clients, because a lot of my clients in the last 3 years have been Asian American. Asian American from all like community, all sorts of communities. So like, Filipino American, Chinese American, Japanese American, Indian American, so it's not just, we're not just one Asian, there's many. But it kind of changed like the events that happened during the pandemic, and like all the racial stuff happening in the media, and in reality, it kind of changed the conversations we were having. And a lot of it had to do with like just people wanting to feel safer, and like people not feeling safe in public. And then that translating into the birth space, because pregnancy can be a very vulnerable time. Like, even though it's amazing and it's a powerful experience, pregnancy can make people feel like scared and vulnerable. And especially when you're in labor, like it's a very transformative, powerful experience. We can also feel very like vulnerable and like terrified, like who are the people around me? Like, can I, trust them? And so I feel like because of that, there have been more families of color, like of Asian descent, or like AAPI, like seeking out like Asian American birth workers. And surprisingly, there's not a lot in my, like in New York. I mean, there are some, but I feel like there are just not a lot. Like, and that's what my clients have told me, that like look online and like try to find people, and there's not a lot, which is kind of sad, but hopefully there are like more people who are willing to, of color or Asian American who can, become birth workers.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
I'm on the same boat, just coming from that part of the world
Yeah.
as well, and having a family from
Right.
that part of the world. It's hard
Yeah.
to, you see a lot of doctors, but not a lot of people in pelvic health space. There's tons of Indian doctors.
Right.
Somebody who's listening definitely has an Indian
Right.
doctor. But in the pelvic space, it's very rare that you're going to see somebody working who's a skin tone that I have. But I think that also informs the work that you do and helps you provide empathy and kind of a different perspective, because birth is also culturally driven, right? It's not just there's a lot of gray when it comes to how different cultures, different people who have different expectations and assumptions and ways that their religion or culture or ethnicity look at birth and how they handle birth and how they view it. And so I think that it's important for anybody to be cognizant, because you're not going to be able to represent all of these cultures, but just to be aware and cognizant and be open. And it just helps sometimes if you have a view that's not mainstream, or your family or your culture has a view that's not mainstream as well. I think it helps in some ways. For me personally, it's kind of like the opposite, and at least as a pelvic floor PT, because we never talked about the pelvic floor, or pelvis, or anything below the waist in our household.
Right.
And so for me, like not talking about it has been helpful for me to kind of relate to and communicate with patients who have a tough time opening up about a lot of their pelvic floor dysfunction, for example. But on that note, I kind of wanted to go back to your experience in Uganda and the kind of difference that the differences. I know you said there was like some 70 births or something that you did in a day. That's a lot.
Not me, but like the team.
The team. That's still a lot of births. So I guess having that experience and working in so many different hospitals and so many different settings as well, as a birth doula in New York City, what are kind of some of those differences and in their intention or in their environment that you felt like, I guess, is either a pro or con for the way that the system works here in New York?
So at the time, and this was like many years ago, in Uganda, like the average Ugandan woman had 7 children. Like, so that was common. Like obviously the big difference here in New York City, the average person who's giving birth is probably not having 7 children. So that's already a big difference. So culturally, like there are different expectations in terms of like family planning. Well, it
depends on which neighborhood you're in.
Yes, that's true. It depends on this neighborhood. Yes. And I've actually had like a few over the years, a few Hasidic clients. And it's like for them, it's like very culturally, it's just 7 or 12 kids. It's like the norm, So it kind of depends. But on a whole, I think most people in New York City don't have like 7 children. But so that's a big difference. Another big difference when I was in Uganda is like most of the births were attended by midwives and not OBs or surgeons. So there were like OBs there, but there were fewer than the midwives. So there were more midwives like just to be present for the births. Which was awesome. And here in the US and in New York City, obviously it's more OBs like taking over 90% of the births, and a very, very few births are attended by midwives. So those are the obvious main big differences. Another big difference I remember was a lot of Ugandan women, at least when I had interacted with them in that space, did not know what an epidural was or had no expectation to get one. Here, the epidural is a largely used, pain pharmacological pain relief. So yeah, I mean, there are obvious differences for sure.
Okay. So on that note, I'm assuming you work in different kinds of hospitals, but maybe also in birth centers or other kinds of settings, or maybe do you do also home births?
I don't do, my last home birth was last July. So every now and then I'll do a home birth, but most people who come to me specifically because they want to have a hospital birth. Okay. It's also like where I just feel like I just know I because of my clinical background, I don't mind being in a hospital. But I mostly do hospital births.
Got it. And do you find that from different hospitals, like in New York, at least there's a lot of different culture and environment that you kind of have to get used to and acclimated with?
Yes. It's like interesting because as a birth worker, and this is something that clinicians don't get to see, Like because once you're a clinician, you're usually associated with a hospital unless you're a private, like a clinician. But it's like as a birth worker, I get to work in so many different hospitals, not as an employee. So I get to see like the culture and then like also compare it. And it's like you just get like a broader perspective of kind of what to expect. Like there are certain hospitals here in New York City that are more interventionist and like really kind of like medicine driven, like medical intervention driven. And some folks want that and some folks like that, and that's great. And then like I tell them, okay, if you like that kind of birth experience and expect that kind of birth experience and feel comfortable there, this is a hospital for you, or that's a practice for you. Or if I work with folks who really want low intervention, or the folks who kind of like wanted a home birth but like it's their first baby, so they're not like 100% like comfortable with home birth, but they want somewhere in between, I refer them to midwives, or certain OBs who are known to have like more low intervention kind of approach. And then those, yeah, that are associated with certain hospitals. Like for sure, it's like very, like it's just really cool how I get to see like how it works. And like every hospital has their own policies and their own like culture and how they do things. And it's interesting because it's like once you go into a specific hospital, the people in that hospital, I think largely think that that's like the norm in like every hospital. And then like me going in there, I'm like, no, actually, they don't do that in that hospital. You only do it here. And then they're like, what? Yeah. I'll give you an example. Like I was in one hospital one time and my client really wanted an epidural. And so, but we got there and she was 10 centimeters dilated. And then like the team told her, it's like, it's too late. But she was 10 centimeters dilated and the baby was still a little high. It's like she had some time for the baby to come down. She didn't feel like she needed to push, but they told her like, no, you can't have the epidural. But I said, well, in the other hospital, my other client get the epidural at 10 centimeters. And they're like, okay, fine. Because like, I mean, medicine, with the exception of a few very obvious things, it's not really life and death, but life or death. So there's a lot of gray,
Mm-hmm.
So like the practice of medicine is very like up to how the comfort of your provider and the culture of the hospital or the culture of the practice. So it's like when someone tells you like, no, you can't do that. Like, can you not do that? Or like, is it just like a thing that happens here? Like, and as a birth worker, you can kind of pick out, it's like, no, that's a thing that just happens here because I did that like, last week in my other birth. So it's like a very, it's very interesting as you know.
Yeah, no, I actually, the reason why I asked
Yeah.
that is because I assumed, I mean, I obviously don't go and attend births in hospitals and I don't have like a frame of reference, but I imagined that there's a culture just like there is everywhere. Somebody told me recently, like there are things that are medically necessary and medically suggested. And they're often families don't know the difference between the two because it's not clear what the difference is between the two.
Yes.
And that kind of segues nicely into what I wanted to talk about next, which is your role with birth justice and advocating for patients and clients in the hospital room when things might get a little hot and heated. How do you approach that? And what's your take on that? And what does birth justice even mean to you, I guess, is the first part of that.
Yeah. For me, birth justice is many things, but a lot of people will describe it as a movement where like people are just becoming more aware that in the birth space, you have choices and that you don't have to just do what people tell you to. Like your medical team or even your doula or whoever, it's like, whoever's giving birth, like they have a right to say something about how they want their birth experience to go. So that in my mind, that's birth justice. Like other people say birth justice is just a right that we all have. It's like it's a right to just get good care when you're in the birth space. So whatever that means for you. For me specifically, because like I said, recently I've been working mostly with Asian American, like Pacific Islander communities. The birth justice part of it like starts prenatally. Like I meet with my clients like often, like sometimes up to 6 or 7 times before the actual birth. That's like prep them holistically, but also to like prepare them for like it's going to be an intense situation, an intense environment. Like I want to always remind them that to like they have a choice and they have like a voice. It's interesting, like, and I found this specifically with families who are not from here, like immigrant families or families who like the language is not English, first language is not English, where if you come into contact with the medical system or the birth system, it's very intimidating. It's like it's very intimidating, and also you're kind of in a vulnerable situation. So there's a lot of potential for trauma because like like your doctor or your provider, whoever that is, like I'm sure has the best intentions, but like because there's kind of like a cultural divide, and because a lot of immigrant families, or like at least the families I work with, like they kind of just like perform the expectations of them, like whatever's expected of them, they just do it. And that's like, you can do that, but like also you don't have to do that. And like I work a lot with my clients in the beginning, like before there's even a birth that's happening, and tell them like, this is it's not something that you might experience. Like you might feel scared to say something. You might just, like you might defer, like especially in Asian communities, we just defer to medical providers because
They're
of course,
God.
like, I mean, obviously, yeah, yes, they are. And obviously, like, yes, that they're very well trained. And like, I'm sure like they also have compassion and want the best for you, but also they're not you.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you want to say no, or if you want to say, no, can I have more information? Or no, I want time to think about it. Or no, I want more space. Or no, I want to be alone with my partner for a little bit. Like you can say that. And a lot of folks are scared to. And so like, I have to be like, it's okay to say that. Like no one, there are very specific instances where it's like actually life or death. But if it's like I said, the medicine is so gray. So it's like, you can say that. So yeah, so that's how I approach it. Like when I work with families, like we talk about that a lot. Like what are things that like we go on through different scenarios of what can happen in the birth space. And then I remind them like, you can always, I said, if you're really feeling uncomfortable, just say you need to pray, because usually people leave you alone. Or like, I need time out to meditate. Like, no one's going to be like, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
It's like we talk about like how to approach a situation that might be new to them, or where they might feel vulnerable and scared when they don't want to like make a decision that they might regret later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is your, I guess, your best advice that you can give for after attending so many births and being in so many different kind of partner relationship dynamics with your birthing families? What's the best advice or tip or strategy that you can give the partner of the birthing individual, if there is one, to just optimize the situation and do the best that they can in your eyes? Of course, I know that's subjective in different ways, but for you as a birth doula who's there, whose purpose is to advocate for the patient, what's the best thing that the partner can do in your
For the
eyes?
partner, to be sure that they know what their partner wants, like for the partner to know what the birthing person wants, and to be as aligned with that as possible. um the I've It doesn't happen often, but like every now and then, like if there's a disagreement, or there's like some miscommunication in what the birthing person wants and what the partner thinks they want, that can cause a lot of stress. Like, and we want to like minimize stress in like the birth space to like really try to progress the labor. The last thing a person who in labor wants to do is fight with their partner. So like just try it as much as for the partners to be aligned with what their partner wants, and also to prepare in the way they want to be prepared. Like I was just with a client yesterday, and we were like kind of talking about what kind of what they wanted for the birth. And um, I asked my client's partner like, okay, how do you feel about, where do you want to be like during this stage of labor, or this this time? And then he just said, well, whatever, wherever she wants me, like whatever she wants, I will, whatever makes her comfortable, I'll do it. And I was like, like that's a good, like it really is a good answer, because it really kind of is about the person giving birth, and it's like whatever makes them comfortable. So yeah, it's like a partner who kind of approaches the birth, a partner who approaches the birth knowing that they're a support system for the person in labor is how it should be, not someone competing with the person in labor, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Janelle, are there any specific birth stories that you've experienced that's empowered you to want to keep doing the work that you do, or that has made you feel discomfort or any negative, either like in the positive or the negative way, that's just kind of just given more insight into birth and its ambiguities and its gray space more than you had before that experience?
Yeah. The positive stories are always like, is easy, like that's an easy reason for me to keep on going, because it's like really good positive feedback when I work with families, and the outcome is happy and expected, and it's what they wanted, and they can come out of it feeling empowered. So that's really easy, and I love that. It does happen. What the stories that make me want to keep on going are actually the ones that are not as positive. It's the ones that like in a way break me. This last year I had a client who suffered a stillbirth, late term, like a stillbirth. And then the year before I had another stillbirth, and like some doulas I talk to don't even, like, in 20 years, don't even see any stillbirths, which is, I think, kind of amazing and great. But like I saw two in like 2 years, and I was like, after those two, like it kind of just, it totally broke me, and it made me question like if I wanted to keep on doing this. Um, but it also, like, like what I realized after that experience, and supporting families through that like, stillbirth is a part, like it's a reality, like even though we don't really talk about it as a culture, it's a reality. um, and that made me want to keep on doing it, because it's like, if I were to just turn away from the stories that made me uncomfortable, then like I would be doing a disservice to the people who needed that support. So I guess the stories that, like, the experiences I had that want to keep me going are the ones that probably break me and probably want, like, probably make me not want to do it. But then, like, I go back in and I'm like, no, but I need to. It's like there are people who need support, like, because birth is like 99% amazing. Like, like the outcomes are positive most of the time, but then you do have situations where the reality of birth is not great. It's traumatic. It's really painful. There's a lot of grief around it. So it's like that's true too in the birth space, because I tend, like, we sometimes focus a lot on, like, oh my gosh, it's so amazing, it's magical. It is, like, it's so great, and birth is beautiful, but it's also, like, really fraught, and there can be a lot of, like, dark stuff that come out, and I feel like we shouldn't, like, ignore that too. We should also be aware that, like, that can happen. um yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. And you're right, it is the reality. Sometimes I work with patients during their prenatal care and they've had a miscarriage, and then, they're back to the drawing board. And now more than ever, over the last 2 years, I guess I would say, I've worked with so many more patients who've gone through IVF than I had before. I'm sure you experienced that too. And that comes with all its own, I know that's another conversation on its own, but it comes with all its own stressors and emotional kind of baggage that's brought to the birth itself. Especially if it's been a long journey, a long IVF journey for that individual. But yeah, I think I resonate with it, that it's kind of like sometimes that's the hard stuff, and it's the stories where there's a lot of humanness and a lot of pain, that really helps us want to do it more, because it's just like, that's part of the reality of it. I mean, it's the part of life, and it's unfortunately a statistical reality that there is going to be, if you work in the birth space, you're going to experience some level of trauma with your clients and patients, and that can sometimes affect you, but it's kind of the way that you take it, right? So I love that you also, like, kind of think of it like the negative as a positive, where it drives you to do more of what you do and not quit on your patients, because I know that patients love you and they work with you for a reason, and they're inspired by you and the whole package, everything that you bring to the table, and the empathy and the experience as well. So I'm so happy that you're in this space, and that you're so happy that I get to collaborate with you in so many different capacities over the last few years, and can't wait to collaborate more and see where our paths cross more.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so excited too. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So how can people find you and work with you, if there's any expecting families, or just people who want to learn more about your work and get to know you more?
Yeah. So yeah, I work mostly, so I do in-person births in New York City, but I can do virtual support from anywhere. So yeah, so I have a website, so it's janeldoula.com. So you can just look at my website, my contact info is there. But yeah, that's pretty much it.
Great. I'll drop that website on the show notes so people can take a look and contact Janel. And for listeners, we talk a lot about birth on this podcast because it's just part of the space that I work in so closely. But what I love is that, like, the voice that you're bringing in here today, Janel, and the way that you're kind of communicating the work that you do is really special. And coming at it from different angles and having that medical background and talking about birth justice, these are all, like, really important topics. And I think that people who are in that space, who work closely in that space, know, but sometimes it takes a lot to convince or talk to your clients and families that, hey, like, yeah, like you said, you sometimes sit with them for 6 or 7 sessions to just be like, this is going to be challenging. This is going to be hard. And, you've seen it a bunch of times, but to bring that reality in to people and to help them understand, like, it's great. 99% of the time, it's awesome. And things might go exactly as you planned, but I think that the piece that I love is the empathy and the communication that you bring. It's so important to have that open line of communication and really be there for the families that we support. So thank you for the work you do. And thank you so much for your
Thank you.
time on coming into the show today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Neha.